Welcome back to Fiction Flux. Today, we're kicking off a new What If series, exploring a darker twist. What if Deku became a Hulk? Let's dive right in. Your son will never get a quirk. The words rang through the ears of young Izuku Midoriya even as his mother drove him home from the quirk clinic. His mother drove in silence while Izuku stared down at his feet, or more specifically, his toes. 2 joints, one in each little toe, was all the doctor needed to look at before writing him off as a lost cause, part of the 10% of society that was powerless, quirkless. As they pulled into the parking structure of their building, Izuku tried hard not to think about all the things he would miss out on by being quirkless. He wouldn't get to show off cool powers in class like Kaken did, he wouldn't be able to punch through buildings like All Might, he couldn't even have his father study his quirk like he did for so many others as a quirk doctor in America. But, maybe, just maybe, he could still be a hero. As he rewatched his favorite video of All Might saving people from a building, smiling the whole way, he couldn't help but think that even if he was quirkless, that was what he was going to do with his life, save people with a smile. And so, even as his mother told him that she was sorry, leaving unspoken her lack of faith in his dreams, Izuku remained firm. He was going to be a hero, like All Might, and he wasn't going to let being quirkless stop him. That belief, however, didn't sit well with others, his best friend Bakugo Katsuki most of all. It was him that gave him the nickname Deku. Useless. He was also the one currently staring down Izuku as he stood over the boy that Bakugo and his 2 cronies had been bullying before. I won't let you hurt him anymore, Kaken. That's not what heroes do. Izuku protested, his wide green-gray eyes frantically watching the small explosions crackle in his best friend's hands. Useless little Deku, you're even more worthless than the extra behind you. You'll never be a hero without a quirk, that's just not how the world works. I'll even prove it to you, Deku, Katsuki said in a childish drawl, his wide smirk matched by his 2 companions. Izuku knew he was about to get beat up, he just couldn't match Katsuki and his 2 followers, even if he had a quirk, 3v1 wasn't exactly fair. Hey extra, if you help us beat up Deku we won't bother you anymore, how's that for a deal? Bakugo asked the downed boy he had been beating previously. Izuku froze in a cold sweat, surely the boy wouldn't, he was trying to help, and Bakugo was. That thought process quickly died as he felt a small foot connect with the back of his knee, causing him to fall on the ground in front of Kaken. See Deku, even the people you try to help are better than you, you're just a useless nothing. Get with the program Deku, you're never going to be a hero. Katsuki bragged before sending a strong kick into Izuku's side as he made to stand up. Izuku let out a yelp of pain as he felt the 4 boys continue to kick him, could hear Katsuki's hands crackling with small explosions fueled by his excitement. And all he could think was why. Why was he born quirkless? Why Kaken had to be so mean? Why the boy had helped Kaken when he was just bullying him instead of Izuku? Why? The word ran constantly through Izuku's head as he felt every kick connect before finally stopping on one final question. Why was the world so unfair? And for the first time in his short life, Izuku got angry. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right, and there was nothing he could do about it except scream his protests. It was bubbling in his stomach, slowly expanding outwards to his skin. The rage he was feeling was all-encompassing. It made him stronger. He couldn't even feel the kicks anymore. All he could feel was the rage building within him, filling him until it burst outwards in a mighty roar. And just like that, Izuku knew nothing more. Across the city, Shota Aizawa was not a happy man. Not only had he been pulled for an extra day shift on top of his usual night shift, he was also forced to partner with Hisashi, also known by his hero name of Present Mike. A good friend, but not a person he would choose to deal with when he was running on less than 2 hours of sleep and the beginning of a bad case of dry eye. All he wanted to do was go to bed, but here he was, parked on a cafe rooftop. "Ya hear that, Shota? Sounds like they need backup at the park, let's roll," Mike said before turning and jumping across the rooftops towards the park at the heart of the city. Honestly, why Mike got so excited over what was probably a minor villain trying to kidnap some kid, Shota wasn't sure, but as he followed, he couldn't help but feel this was going to be something a bit bigger. The sounds of sirens going the same direction as himself proved him to be correct. When he arrived at the scene, Aizawa was shocked to see several small-time heroes already laid out across the park, Ingenium rushing about bringing them out of the combat zone to safety. Mike was near the ambulances, sending his sonic blasts towards Death Arms and the slightly smaller figurine that was currently beating him across the park. The villain was smaller than Aizawa would have expected, but that didn't mean anything to their apparent strength. Some of the heroes he saw broken across the ground were known for their strength if nothing else, and it was clear the only reason Death Arms was lasting this long was because his opponent fought like a berserker rather than with any skill. On top of being just shorter than the average adult, the villain had grey skin, tinged with a faint green, and a wild mane of black hair, also with a faint green tint when the light hit it. It was also built like a mini All Might, that is to say, all muscles, built on top of even more muscle, that still seemed stronger than it looked. Eraserhead, can you shut it down? Mike called over, taking a break from distracting the grey berserker as it again tried to break through Death Arm's guard. A hard stare later and Izuku knew he was going to be useless this fight, as the berserker didn't even show a single sign of slowing down or transforming into a person. All the weariness he felt drained away, replaced by determination and a small amount of fear. This was going to be much harder than he first thought. Nothing, I don't think we can take it down as is, we need to stall for someone stronger to get here to put it down. Izuku shouted back before preparing himself to go in. While he couldn't stop the beast, he could most certainly slow it down until someone with more raw power arrived to finish the job. Roger, Mike shouted, the usual cheer gone from his voice as he again blasted the grey-skinned berserker, who barely seemed to notice the sonic attack beyond giving a roar and smashing even harder at Death Arms. Izuku quickly leapt in and sent a kick at the side of the berserker's face from behind, and was utterly shocked when it barely flinched, only sending a wild swat backwards and knocking Izuku into the wall of a building roughly. Careless, no wonder only Death Arms was able to hold this thing off. He was the only one capable of getting enough force in one spot for the thing to even feel his attacks. As Izuku sat up, he saw a shadow descending from overhead even as the berserker finally landed a solid punch into Death Arm's stomach, sending him flying across the park and through a wall, where he was slow to get up. Before the berserker could pursue his fallen foe, Ingenium sped his way with an assault of speed-empowered blows, only to have both his punches caught and his arms broken in a painful grip before being casually tossed aside by the relentless berserker. Fortunately, he was caught by Ryukyu in her dragon form as the number 9 ranked hero descended onto the field, blocking off the berserker from reaching the slowly rising Death Arms. Eraser, help Death Arms, I should be able to finish this guy off. Ryukyu called to Izuku, who could only nod and acknowledge how outmatched he was in this fight. With the promotional fight between All Might and Endeavor happening in a week's time, at the number 2 hero's insistence, a great majority of the more powerful heroes were 2 cities over, and unable to come match the berserker in a timely manner. Only Ryukyu's flight had let her arrive soon enough to make a difference. No matter how small that might be. Already the park was in ruins, and Izuku could see the injured forms of multiple children being loaded into an ambulance and being driven away from the scene. Whoever this guy was, he was going down. You see what started this? Izuku asked Death Arms as he helped him get away from the Ryukyu and the berserker squaring off. I was here since the start, whatever that thing is, it came from inside the park, tearing everything apart and going after some kids. I was the one that gave them enough time to get away, but one had severely broken fingers and another 2 had broken legs. The blonde was worst off, ribs, a leg and both his arms were a mess in a matter of seconds. Lucky Ingenium was near enough to get them all away while I fought that thing, because even now, it's going after them. And even as Izuku turned to face the fight between the top 10 hero and the smaller berserker, he could see Death Arms was telling the truth. Even as it picked up a fallen tree and tried to club Ryukyu with it, it also chucked it in the direction the ambulance with the boys he had seen leave in. It's intelligent, maybe not human level, but enough to pick certain targets. Izuku realized, the pain mixed with growing concern for the ongoing fight driving away any lingering exhaustion he might have been feeling. Yeah, let's just hope Ryukyu can take this thing down, otherwise that thing's gonna tear through the city to get after those kids. Death Arms agreed, gingerly holding his undoubtedly broken ribs as Izuku led him to a waiting medic. Get back out there, Eraser, they're gonna need all the help they can get. Death Arms said, before finally passing out. Only now could Izuku see just how bad of shape the man was really in. His titanium arm guards were heavily cracked and almost shattered in places. One of his arms was undoubtedly broken and both his shoulder looked like they were popped from their sockets. All that, and he kept going until a lucky punch had done in most of his ribs and damn near caved in his chest cavity. Truly a plus ultra performance from the punching hero. Stealing his resolve, Izuku jumped back out to the front lines as Ryukyu and the berserker continued their fight. While his strength was certainly impressive, it seemed that the smaller berserker couldn't move Ryukyu, nor could his blows truly hurt her through her diamond-hard scales. But on the flip side, he was agile enough to dodge away from his larger opponent's slower blows. It was a stalemate, but Izuku couldn't see that lasting long. Ryukyu had more cards left to play than the Berserker, and all it would take was one good hit to put him down. That hit came as the Berserker ducked under a claw swipe from the dragon hero, who quickly continued her momentum and smacked the Berserker with her tail in a mighty swing, causing a small explosion of force and a dust cloud to rise. Izuku waited patiently for the dust to clear, to see if the Berserker was truly put down by the strong blow from Ryukyu's tail, but what he saw was not something he, nor anyone else, was expecting. Instead of being crushed under Ryukyu's tail, the Berserker had caught the dragon's rearmost appendage and was slowly pulling on it, even as Ryukyu tried to pull her tail out of the Berserker's grasp. SKAAR smash. With a mighty roar of fury, the muscular grey-skinned Berserker heaved and threw Ryukyu's entire body and smashed the heroine into the ground, drawing a cry of pain from her draconic maw. Before he could jump into the fight to stall for Ryukyu to recover, Izuku saw a familiar pink mist forming around the Berserker. It took a few seconds, but eventually it had inhaled enough and it collapsed in a heap, put to sleep by Midnight's Quirk. Once the mist had dispersed, Izuku was one of the first to approach the sleeping Berserker. Scar it had called itself, ready to react in case it lashed out again. But it was well and truly asleep, and seemed to be shrinking as well. To Izuku and many others' shock, it shrunk until the once powerful Berserker was reduced to the form of a small sleeping child no older than 4. Izuku watched as handcuffs were put on him and he was carried to a cop car, following in case he awoke and transformed again, but he doubted he would be necessary. The kid had a powerful quirk, and it was probably his first time using it, which was why he lost control. But standard procedure was to arrest the perp, which was something he had argued against. Showing the kid that cops were the bad guy was not something that would go well in the long run, and he never wanted to be on the receiving end of the boy's Berserker form. But Izuku only watched as the boy was unloaded and taken into the police precinct. He wished the boy well, but he would never forget that underneath the innocent freckles and wavy hair hid a raging monster just waiting to be set free. The boy had potential if he could get himself under control while he transformed, and Izuku was interested to see if he could live up to it. Maybe he would take that teaching job he had been offered after all. Of course, the fact that he could sleep through class just like he had when he was in school himself was another benefit. Izuku yawned and began the long journey to his awaiting bed back home. Potential indeed. In the precinct, Toshinori Yagi had come as soon as he saw the news. While he hadn't been fast enough to stop the grey-skinned berserker that called itself Scar himself, he was there fast enough to claim guard duty over the sleeping child that held the beast within. And upon seeing the boy, any doubts he had previously had were erased. The quirk could have been a coincidence, but the boy's face was almost identical to his father's. Match that with an almost identical quirk, and All Might knew exactly who he was dealing with. It had been years since he had been to America and last spoken to the man in person, but when he had, Bruce had been certain that he had gotten rid of his own quirk, completely erased it from his DNA. And yet, here was living proof that the Hulk, the only opponent to ever overpower him, wasn't as dead as the world thought it was. Toshinori knew he had to watch over the boy, while he was confident in his ability to avenge his late master. If All for One got his hands on this quirk, the result would be disastrous. Not to mention he owed it to his old friend for helping him completely master One for All. So for now he would wait, and he would vouch for the boy when he woke up. His father had been feared and chained because of his powerful and out-of-control quirk, but All Might would see the boy in front of him become whatever he wanted to. After all, it was a hero's duty to meddle when they weren't wanted if it meant helping someone else. Izuku woke up slowly, his eyes felt heavy, and all of his tiny undeveloped muscles ached. It wasn't until he reached up to straighten his hair that he realized one important detail. He was in handcuffs. Once he came to that realization, he quickly came to several more. He wasn't in his bed, but on a dingy cot with a semi-clean woolen blanket. There was an exposed toilet and sink in the corner of the room, but no mirror over it. He wasn't in his room, he was in a jail cell. Izuku felt his heart rate spike as panic began to spread into his bones. He felt a warmth spreading through his chest and begin flowing through his body. Then that feeling was cut off and Izuku almost collapsed on the floor, barely managing to catch himself on the edge of the bed as he made to stand. He was right after all, my quirk only works if you are in the process of transforming. A dry, tired voice spoke from the other side of the bars. Izuku turned his attention to the figure on the other side, who was leaning against the far wall, his goggle-covered eyes facing Izuku in an intense stare. He was dressed in all black and had long black hair that looked like it was constantly ruffled. Around the man's neck was what looked like a long white bandage. If Izuku had to guess, he was still in his early 20s, but the lines on his face made him seem older. What? Izuku tried to ask, his voice stumbling as he took in man that looked to be a hero. Your quirk activated for the first time, sent you on a rampage, you injured several pros and bystanders before you were brought under control. So now you're here until the higher-ups can decide what to do with you. The man said, his voice never wavering from its deadpan. But, the doctor said I didn't have a quirk, that I was quirkless, Izuku said in a small voice, curling into himself as he sat on the old bed. Well, they were wrong, and there's a hospital ward full to prove it. He replied before falling silent, his gaze still set on Izuku. Izuku could feel his heart racing again, once again in fear, but for a different reason. He had hurt innocent people, he had hurt heroes. How monstrous was his quirk that he would do something so against everything he stood for. He felt his heart start to race again, the warmth spreading through his chest, until once again it was cut off and Izuku almost fell over again. Stop doing that, kid, you're giving me dry eye over here. The man complained, rubbing his brow over his goggles. Izuku paused his thoughts and took in what the man had said. You mean that warm feeling in my chest, that's my quirk activating, and you're stopping it? He was watching the man closely, he was pretty sure he knew who this was, but it didn't hurt to be certain. Yeah, I'm erasing your quirk, that's why I'm here. You're Eraserhead, the new underground hero who specializes in ambush tactics and busting crime rings. Izuku felt his heart rate spike in excitement as he gushed about the hero in front of him, the warm feeling once again spreading before it was stripped from him for a third time in as many minutes. Geez, kid, are you doing that on purpose or is your quirk just going off on its own? That cut Izuku off of his rant more than the cold feeling in his chest. It's my quirk, I guess, I'm not trying to use it. He mumbled out as Eraserhead gave a sigh of resignation. I thought so, but you'll have to get a handle on that if you ever want to get out of here, because I can't follow you around everywhere keeping your quirk in. Check. Eraserhead, is he awake? A voice asked from down the hall, drawing the attention of both the child and the hero in the jail. Yeah, are they ready for him, Naomasa? We are. You have been requested to stay with us just in case though. The voice, apparently belonging to a man named Naomasa, replied and Eraserhead made his way to the door of the cell and opened it, beckoning for Izuku to follow him out. Of course, Izuku's heart rate spiked and Eraserhead was once again forced to erase his quirk before whatever it was could take hold. Izuku made his way from the cell, down a series of hallways, and into a small room, where 3 men were waiting for him, with Eraserhead bringing up the rear. The man in the middle and sitting opposite from the table was an average-looking man, dressing in a detective's uniform, the coat hanging over the back of his chair. The second was a tall lanky man with sagging blonde hair. His blue eyes seemed to go right through Izuku, unnerving him. At first Izuku thought he was almost skeletal, but under the man's oversized white shirt, he could see a foundation of muscles that rivaled a professional bodybuilder. The last man was older. He had a large white mustache and his white hair was slicked back. He wasn't of Japanese descent, but the American military uniform pointed to his origins. Welcome, Izuku, the detective in the middle spoke in a calming voice. I am Detective Scouchy Naomasa, and while I would like nothing more than to let you go, there are a few things that need to be addressed first, he explained, his voice soothing Izuku and keeping him calmer than he would have been. Izuku gave a shaky nod, the handcuffs around his wrists making a light clanging sound against the table as he did so. Is it really necessary to have him in handcuffs? The blonde inquired, glaring at the offending pieces of metal around Izuku's wrists. Unfortunately, yes, until this meeting is over, I am required by law to leave them on. Naomasa replied with a sigh, giving a small glare at the American, who only nodded stiffly. All right, let's begin then, the blonde said, focusing his attention on Izuku. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Age 4. 2 months ago you were diagnosed quirkless by Dr. Daruma Ujiko. Our own tests have pulled the same conclusion. There is an explanation for this, however, Yagi, if you would. Naomasa said, gesturing to the blonde. Of course, Detective. Young Midoriya, I have worked with your father, OneDrive. Bruce Banner in America before. He possesses the same quirk you do. In America, he is kept in a government laboratory and under watch at all times in case his quirk activates. He is only allowed to use his quirk when the government deems it appropriate and they deploy him only in worst-case scenarios. As Mr. Yagi spoke, Izuku felt his head spinning as he took in information he had never known about his father. Dr. Banner is a friend of mine, and I believe the reason you appear to be quirkless to our tests is his doing. Mr. Yagi continued, his face aging before Izuku's eyes. Your father hates his quirk, and has been experimenting on himself in an attempt to get rid of it. About 6 years ago, he believed he was successful, and he passed the tests put forth by the American government and was released from the labs he was being held in. I was the one who brought him to Japan to celebrate his newfound freedom, and that was when he met your mother, Midoriya Inko. The more he spoke, the more Izuku couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was almost surreal to him. They were quickly married, but several months after you were born, the American government decided that it was too dangerous to have him out of the country, and he was deported back to America and sent back to the labs, as a full-time researcher this time instead of only part-time. He believes his quirk to be permanently gone, but either he wasn't as through as he thought, or he only got rid of it in himself, but not his ability to pass the quirk down. My belief is that he destabilized his own quirk factor, which made it so while his quirk is still present within him, he has locked it away. When you were born, you inherited his quirk, but it changed as it became your own quirk. Your own quirk factor is unstable like your father's, but instead of preventing your quirk from activating, it instead makes you seem quirkless to the normal tests, when the truth is you are anything but. Mr. Yagi concluded, his sharp blue eyes watching Izuku carefully, which is exactly why he should be taken to America and undergo the same procedure as his father, to lock away his quirk. The world doesn't need any raging berserkers running around. The American barked, his eyes boring into Izuku, who needed another erasure form Eraserhead to keep his quirk from activating from his fear of the American. May I remind you, General Ross, that you are only a visitor here on Japanese soil, and that Izuku is a Japanese citizen. While we appreciate the offer, that is not how we operate here. Naomasa harshly rebuked the man, his kind eyes darkening at the general. Before we reach any conclusions, would you mind telling us what you remember from the park, young Midoriya? Mr. Yagi asked, the tone of his voice softer. And so Izuku told them. He told them about the bullying trio, although he refused to name them. He told them about the injured boy who had joined them, and he told them about the anger he had felt before the warm feeling overtook him and he blacked out. I see. Very well then. In accordance with the First Awakening Act, you will not be penalized for any actions that occurred during the first time you used your quirk. That being said, you will be held responsible in the future. Naomasa said, finally taking the handcuffs off of Izuku, who could only feel relief. That being said, you need to learn to control your quirk, not let it control you. My recommendation is to have your mother enter you into a quirk rehabilitation center, where you will get experience in how to control your quirk in an environment where you can be controlled if you do lose control. Mr. Yagi continued, drawing a snort from Ross. Good luck controlling that monster. It would take someone as strong as All Might to keep him down. Ross said, disdain staining his voice. Seeing as I work in his main office and know All Might is on good terms with Dr. Banner, I'm sure he would be willing to work with young Midoriya when I inform him of the situation. Mr. Yagi shot back. Izuku needed another erasure as his heart spiked from excitement. All Might, willing to help him. He had so many questions he wanted to ask the number one hero. Eraserhead and Naomasa both gave small snorts at his obvious fanboy tendencies. Mr. Yagi only looked amused. And I see from All Might, I can keep him from transforming, and my colleague Midnight was the one who knocked him out this time, and both of us would be willing to help from time to time. Eraserhead added on the Mr. Yagi's point, drawing a warm smile from the blonde man. Ross gave one final grunt of disagreement before turning sharply and leaving the room. Izuku was glad to see the American leave. He finally had a quirk, and even if he couldn't control it right now, he had one. And that meant he could be a hero. Before I leave, Izuku started, surprising Naomasa, who had been going over some paperwork, but, what exactly is my quirk? Izuku asked, drawing a nervous look from all three men in the room. We can play the news report for you, but they aren't very nice in it. Naomasa warned and led Izuku to another room. Izuku assumed it was his office, and he pulled up a video on his laptop before turning the machine so Izuku could watch the video. Izuku watched in muted awe and fear as the news reporter commentated the fight between a small grey-green skinned berserker with two-tone hair and death arms. He watched as almost a dozen sidekicks were tossed aside with barely a second thought. He watched Eraserhead get casually tossed aside. Death Arms and Ingenium both getting injured terribly until Ryukyu and Midnight finally took the berserker. Him. Scar. Down. Even after the video ended, Izuku stared at the black screen, still absorbing what he had seen. He could see why General Ross thought he needed to be controlled now. That much raw power and fighting ability, and it was only the first time his quirk had been active. The amount of power his quirk would obtain naturally without him pushing it become a hero was monstrous. With proper training, Izuku had no clue how strong he could get. Even as all these thoughts came and went, one thought stuck in his mind. He had seen that kind of fight before, from the only person to ever outpower All Might in a fight. My dad's the Hulk. Izuku breathed out, his heart beginning to race. For what felt like the 100th time that day, Eraserhead was forced to shut down his quirk from emerging, keep Scar from emerging. Yes, he is. His identity is a guarded secret by the American government, but as his son, you have the right to know. Mr. Yagi responded, his eyes belaying some emotions Izuku couldn't decipher. Come on Izuku, your mother is here to pick you up. Naomasa said, gently leading the still shocked Izuku from his computer. After a tearful reunion with his mother, one that required Eraserhead to erase his quirk again, Naomasa gave Inko his recommendation. Take him right from here to the Mustafu Quirk Rehab Center. They're one of the best, and Eraserhead can stay with you for the trip there to ensure nothing goes wrong. He may not have been punished for his first offense, but he will be for future ones. Naomasa warned, Eraserhead silently agreeing behind him. Aye. Inko trailed off, still holding Izuku in her arms. Okay, we'll do it your way, but everyone there better treat my baby boy right. Inko insisted, pulling Izuku closer to herself. It'll be fine, I'll drive you myself while Naomasa finishes the paperwork here. Mr. Yagi offered, giving Inko a reassuring toothy smile. Thank you Mr. Yagi, Inko said as they left the precinct, Eraserhead following the mother-son duo silently. The drive was filled with Inko voicing her worries about the facility while Mr. Yagi reassured her. Izuku just took it all in, still processing the truth of his quirk. Scar was unlike anything he had ever seen. He was untamed wild fury given form. Somehow contained within his scrawny frame lay a sleeping giant. The whole ride over, Eraserhead didn't say a word, but his gaze never wavered from Izuku's own silent form. As they arrived at the large building that reminded Izuku of a fortress, he turned to Izuku and gave him a smirk. You got potential kid, now it's up to you to live up to it. And with that, he slipped out of the car and leapt up to the rooftop, where he could keep watch over the building. Izuku held his mother's hand tightly as Mr. Yagi led them inside. There they were greeted by a receptionist, and after almost an hour of paperwork, a nurse came to show Izuku around the facility. My name is Nurse Anzu, if you would follow me Izuku, we can get you settled in. Your mother will be back tomorrow with your belongings. The nurse greeted cheerfully, easing some of Izuku's fear. Izuku, Inko called to her, son as Nurse Anzu took his hand and began to lead him into the facility. You can become a hero, a great hero. She told him, a wide smile on her face, contrasting the waterfall of tears pouring from her eyes. Izuku's whole world brightened as his mother finally said the words he had been dying to hear. The fatigue he had been feeling since he woke up in the jail cell finally fading completely as a new hope took its place. Tears of joy fell down Izuku's face even as Nurse Anzu led him through the facility. Since you're new here, it's our policy to assign an older sibling, if you would. She explained as they walked through the hallway. One of the patients who has been with us for a time will show you how things work, and if you are here for long enough, you might be asked to do the same. Izuku just nodded as he took in the hallways they were walking through. The rehab center was built like a hospital, but with small comfortable apartment-like spaces instead of the usual sterile rooms. We usually only have somewhere around 50 patients at a time here. Some have to stay for years while others have a relatively fast turnaround time. Our most notable patient is the Rescue Hero 13. They were here for almost 2 years before being accepted into UA to fully master their quirk, Black Hole. Nurse Anzu explained to Izuku, who was wishing he had a notebook to write in. And here we are. Nurse Anzu stopped at a pair of doors, one labeled and the other not. You'll stay here, while your big brother will be right next to you. If you need anything and don't feel comfortable going to a nurse, you can go to him. Nurse Anzu explained, knocking on the door. When it opened, Izuku was brought face to face with a red-haired teen, maybe 13 and 14 years old. He had wild spiky hair that stuck out in all directions. His face was gaunt and his frame was skinny. He seemed even more fragile than Mr. Yagi did at first glance. Izuku, this will be your big brother. While you stay here, say hi, why don't you? Nurse Anzu said, drawing a light chuckle from the teen. Hi, Izuku said in a small voice, slightly intimidated by the older boy. His natural nervousness shining through as he worked to keep himself calm, to keep Scar down. Nice to meet you too, buddy. The teen said, reaching out and ruffling Izuku's own wild mop of hair. My name's Toya Todoroki. Somewhere else, hidden laboratory. All for One was a patient man. It was his defining trait. He could wait generations for his plans to come to fruition. But if there was one thing that set him off like nothing else, it was a wasted opportunity. You mean to tell me, he began, rage dripping in his voice as he stared down his top doctor and researcher, that you had the son of the Hulk in your hands, but you didn't realize who he was until the heroes got their hands on him. All for One was almost spitting mad at this point. Too many of his plans had been ruined by the great bluster that was All Might. The only time he had ever seen the man losing was against the Hulk, and he was locked away in America, far from his grasp. To hear that he could have stolen his son's quirk, but had missed the chance. The only reason I know is because they had to use my office's records to confirm it was him. They're keeping his identity extremely confidential. Dr. Ujiko protested, his knees shaking slightly from the presence All for One was exuding. Of course they are, and it would take an all-out assault to get to the boy now. All for One said, plans and ideas spawning and being discarded rapidly from his mind. We'll just make a note of him for now, and if they leave him vulnerable, we can exploit it. What did you say the boy's name was again? Izuku Midoriya, but his alter ego identified as Scar. Scar. All for One said the name slowly, taking in everything he could from it. I wonder what kind of piece you will end up being. Dr. Ujiko could only give a sigh of relief when his boss burst into mad laughter. He was off the hook, for now at least. That meant he could get back to his research into artificial creatures. And the vial he had of Midoriya's blood might just give him the tools he needed to finally be successful. And that wraps up today's episode. Thanks for watching. Be to share your opinions in the comments below. We'll see you in the next episode.